China has always had a powerful, very powerful sense of itself and its role in the world system. I think it's important to remember that China did manage an international system for over 2,000 odd years, and a lot of these concepts and principles are still very much alive in China's contemporary foreign policy.
Professor Nantulya, would you care to make a few remarks?
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Ray, and it is truly a pleasure to be on this panel with colleagues. I've been out of the loop, and I'm still out of the loop in some way. So this is very, very refreshing opportunity for me, my first engagement in many months. Let me just say four or five things very briefly. The first is that, as Amy noted, there is an ebb and flow in as far as China's engagements with African societies is concerned. And this goes way back to the dynastic period. And it's very important to use that as a reference marker, because we see significant patterns that tie into what is happening in contemporary times. Every time there was stability, a sense of confidence, a sense of calm, and a sense of prosperity within China, there was always an expansion of foreign affairs and an expansion of engagements in Africa. So, for instance, if we look at the Han Dynasty, the Ming, especially the Song Dynasty, when China was trying to extend its Silk Road, Africa features in all the critical moments when there was a sense of internal stability in China. There was always a significant uptick in engagement with especially the east coast of Africa and even the southern coast of Africa. And it's interesting to see that the Belt and Road is being constructed along the same along the same nodes that the Silken Road was constructed in historical times. So I think this is critical because currently China arguably is experiencing a sense of strength. Some people say that might be overrated, but the fact is that since the Hu Jintao era in particular, and Xi Jinping now, when China feels sort of a little bit stronger than it was, we've seen an uptick in engagement with African countries. That's the first thing I'd like to say. The second thing I'd like to say is that China, since we're talking about democracy and democratization, China has always had a powerful, very powerful sense of itself and its role in the world system. I think it's important to remember that China did manage an international system for over 2,000 odd years, an international system, and a lot of these concepts and principles are still very much alive in China's contemporary foreign policy. And why the reason I'm emphasizing this is that China. It's very important to recall that China does have certain views about how international order should be organized, about international principles and international norms. And we see that African countries and countries of the global south have always played a very important role in how China conceptualizes what the international system should look like. But I think it's important here to note that China learned a lot of lessons from the collapse of the Soviet Union, and one of which is look after the periphery, don't ignore your periphery, emphasize your global South partnerships, don't be overladen with military spending and military activity, which is extremely important. And then the fourth one was always be careful in terms of how you align or how you be seen to be aligning foreign policy interests with partners. I think there are a number of things here to note. First is in every Congress of the Communist Party of China, there's always been a working group. The Chinese have this concept of, they call it the battle of ideas, the battle of ideas, the battle of ideology, things like culture and so forth. And it's consistently been pointed out in all these congresses that Western liberal democracy and Western liberal norms, in particular, are seen as a terminal threat, to the cohesion of the Communist Party of China and even to China's stability. And again, China goes back to the Soviet Union and recalls that during the years of Yeltsin, for instance, the argument that is being made in the establishment out there in Beijing is that Western ideas of capital accumulation, privatization, democracy, and so on were entering the post-Soviet space and created, quote unquote, a lot of chaos in the system. Which, of course, Putin, there's a sense within China that Putin has tried to kind of rein in what might have led to an overthrow of that system. So Chinese are very, very wedded to this idea and have used significant, first of all, significant capital, and then a whole range of instruments and institutions, such as party-to-party engagements. I mean, the party-to-party platforms of the Communist Party of China are really the spear tip. They're really the spear tip of Chinese foreign policy. So all these engagements with different political parties. I mean, the Communist Party of China probably has more party-to-party exchanges than any political party in the world. And the vast bulk of those engagements are in the global south and in African countries. I mean, over the last 10 years, Xi Jinping the Chinese leaderships have visited Africa 85 times. 85 times. And if we look at, the different, if we look at the hierarchy of the Communist Party of China, you even get a much bigger set of engagements. And if we look at the content of those engagements, much of it is around issues of governance, issues of values, looking at, democracy, but democracy as defined by China and defined by Chinese partners, not necessarily not Western democracy. It is essentially challenging, and not just at the level of values, but even in terms of practices. So we find that from the Communist Party of China, from the different political institutions that China is building. I mean, just a few months ago, China opened its a major school for ideology based in Tanzania, which is meant to be a facility that will train the next generation of Southern African political leaders. And they're going to do everything from ideology to politics to how you organize a political party and that kind of thing. So China has made a lot of inroads, and I think when we think about democracy and democratization, I think the most important thing to understand is that the challenge that China perceives it is trying to counter from Western countries is first and foremost ideological, and it's in the realm of ideas. It's in the realm of governance. It's in the realm of governance norms and governance practices. And it's very, very important to use that framing, because then one can make a better sense as to how the political institution, the political party, and a whole range of institutions under the Communist Party of China are interacting and are trying to build influence on the African continent. Tremendous investments in soft power, tremendous investments in media, tremendous investments in political schools, ideological schools, tremendous investments in supporting and sharing tactics of party building, elections, propaganda, and what have you, with different political parties. I think it's important to note that through the FOCAC mechanism, China is currently training and providing, sort of a professional political training, ideological training to African entities and political parties more than any other industrialized country. I mean, you're talking about between 80,000 and 100,000 training opportunities once every 3 to 4 years. This is quite significant. And recently, China has also made a very strong push to dealing with opposition parties as well as ruling parties. So I think I'll stop there, but it's very important for us to understand this, and for analysts in the State Department, USAID, to really dig deep into this and really understand what this looks like on the ground in Africa.
The perspective I want to take is an extension of the research that I've done with some colleagues as Templeton Fellows. In looking at China's presence in Africa, in some respects, we say that China's solving the problems of respective countries instead of looking around and kind of considering who else is present. The sentiment of some African citizens is that they favor democratic government ideals, yet they really appreciate the advancement that non-democratic governments have provided that facilitate growth and trade. The approach, I think, for building stronger partnerships with African countries can no longer be looked at as though all parties are playing by the same rules. China competes like they're competing in a zero-sum game. So the US should not continue in the future the same way it has in the past. Our approach or mindset needs to change, to be different. I believe the US needs to be a little more selfish in their approach to developing stronger relationships with Africa. Not selfish so much in the mindset that the benefits are only for the US, but selfish in working to develop stronger ties with African countries, regardless of what other ties exist. And this approach needs to be a long-term approach that involves economics, education, sustainable food systems, and facilitation of growth for both entities, both countries, countries in Africa as well as the US. There needs to be more facilitation of combining private companies and government to support and achieve goals that benefit both African countries and the US. We see China's investments and advancements on the continent in many industries, infrastructure, telecommunications, healthcare, and other industries. However, these aren't the only areas where China is involved. And more importantly, these industries and areas don't address the totality of the issues faced by all countries. The US may not be able to compete with China in Africa. And it doesn't seem like China is necessarily interested in cooperation or looking for partners, but instead the US should seek to leverage the infrastructure that China has built to develop the next level of partnership and investment with African countries. I think there's one area that is obvious where we can cooperate with China, and that's in environmental issues and concerns and climate change. Because the environmental changes or concerns affect resource scarcity amongst all African countries, and then affect climate change and environmental concerns across the world. I believe the road to encourage democracy needs to take a different approach. Given that African countries see the benefit and the economic benefit of building a sustainable society, perhaps that recognition would provide interest in growing the wealth of the country and the wealth of the government. The US can be a partner in that, and partner with the nuances of a particular African country instead of trying to partner on regional levels, but really to recognize the uniqueness of each country and its needs, and to attend to those special development needs. I think there are important places where we can do that in terms of revising existing trade agreements, working on sustainable food systems, and through education and human resource development. And I'll end there.
To watch the full video, check out the link in the description below. And if you found value in the content, hit the subscribe button. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.